Right. Stacy gave me the thumbs up, so we're ready to go. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ethan, and I'm the technology advisor for the SBDC, for Iowa SBDC. And today's presentation is on opportunity zones. And the presentation is ultimately a collaboration with the Wyoming SBDC and the Iowa SBDC. But we would also like to recognize the Wyoming and Iowa SBA district offices as well for their support, not only with this initiative, but also with many projects and initiatives that we work on with our district offices as well. So thank you for all of your support from the SBDCs. I also want to recognize several individuals. Jill Klein, State Director for Wyoming SBDC. Lisa Shimkat, State Director with Iowa SBDC. Jordan Belser, Wyoming SBA Project Officer. And Jane Armstrong, Iowa SBA District Director. Jill, Jordan, and Jane, is there anything that you would like to add or mention? Jill, maybe starting with you.
Well, thanks, Ethan. Yes, I just want to thank everyone for this collaborative opportunity. And I'll actually introduce Jordan. He is our SBA Public Affairs Specialist, as well as our project officer. And we work very closely with SBA, of course, on opportunity zone presentations, as well as many other things. But Jordan, I'll give you an opportunity to just say a few things about what we're doing in Wyoming on opportunity zones.
Yep, thank you very much, Jill. Like Jill mentioned, my name is Jordan Belser, and in addition to some of the other hats that she mentioned, I do veterans business development as well. When it comes to Wyoming, we're home to 25 opportunity zones. And when you couple that opportunity with some of the intrinsic benefits of being in Wyoming with low taxes, including no state taxes or corporate income tax, it can make it a pretty awesome place to be for a small business. We're very fortunate to have Jill and her team at the SBDC, and as we conduct some of these types of trainings in Wyoming. Obviously, COVID-19 and the pandemic and the disaster assistance has kind of taken the forefront, but we do enjoy being able to talk about opportunity zones as well. What do we want you to know? That we exist, right? That I'm here, that Jill is here, that the folks at the Wyoming Business Council, which is the state of Wyoming's economic development arm, they have a cool website for opportunity zones as well. That we are here to support you as a small business. I think you're going to get a pretty good understanding of what opportunity zones are throughout this course, so I won't take up too much time. But just know that there's a rather robust support network and resources available to you. And as you go down this journey and you might look at opportunity zones as an avenue for your business, you don't have to do that alone. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Ethan. And thanks again for letting us be here.
All right. Thank you, Jill and Jordan. Jane, is there anything that you'd like to mention on the Iowa side? Jane, is there anything that you'd like to mention?
I'm sorry, I thought I was on mute. Anyhow, thank you so much, and just appreciate everything that the SBDCs are doing with the Opportunity Zone program, and thank you for hosting this event.
Well, thank you, Jane, and also to you, Jordan, for our SBA partners. So we really appreciate all the support that you guys give the SBDCs, both in Wyoming and Iowa. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump into today's presentation. Our guest presenter is Catherine Lyons. We're really excited to have Catherine with us. She is the Director of Policy for Economic Innovation Group, or EIG. And EIG is an incredible organization, particularly with opportunity zones, because they were fundamental in the development of opportunity zones, and they know a lot about every detail that goes into opportunity zones and how economic developers can use opportunity zones to facilitate economic growth for our local communities. So I'm sure many of us on the call are aware to some extent of what opportunity zones are, but if you're anything like me, you haven't taken that deep dive maybe into the details of opportunity zones and how we can use the tool to facilitate economic growth. So again, EIG is a public policy organization that combines innovative research and data-driven advocacy to address America's most pressing economic challenges. So we're very lucky to have Catherine with us today. And with that, I will go ahead and hand the baton to Catherine. And if you have any issues with Zoom, let us know and we'll get it all figured out. So thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. And as I said at the beginning of the call, apologize for my background. We are painting today, so things are a bit chaotic, and hopefully that won't disrupt anything even further. So I appreciate everyone bearing with me. I'm going to share my screen. I've prepared a brief presentation today that will hopefully everyone can see that. That will walk through some of the basics on opportunity zones. Again, assuming a little bit, some baseline knowledge, but I'll walk through a bit of the policy and the incentive and how it works, and then what we're seeing within the market, and where, particularly what we're seeing with opportunity zones and how the policy is working for operating businesses, which of course I would imagine this group would be particularly interested in, and play an important role around as well. And Ethan, thank you for the warm introduction. EIG has been involved in the kind of genesis of this policy and in its implementation, since it passed at the end of 2017. So a bit more context for sort of why we're in the mix here, on this policy. So in terms of kind of starting off and just sort of providing a quick baseline on, what opportunity zones are and kind of what makes them unique as a community development incentive and tool. This is a tax incentive for investors to take their capital off of the sidelines and hopefully put them into places that are distressed, underserved, and have a real kind of latent possibility for economic growth, but have been kind of overlooked by traditional investors for a long time. So the idea here is that, it is trying to change the behavior of investors who have capital gains. And instead of putting them, on the coasts where often capital like that goes, the idea is to put them into designated communities and receive a sizable kind of tax benefit in doing so. There's a specific focus on equity capital. So that is certainly a unique aspect of opportunity zones. This is not a debt vehicle. This is something for equity capital to go into projects and businesses. One other area that makes, I think, this unique from other community development incentives or tax credit programs that have a very specific use case, there's a lot of flexibility with opportunity zones. You can use these for, a whole range of operating businesses. You can use them for, vertical farms, manufacturing facilities, brownfield redevelopment, affordable or workforce housing. The list goes on, and and I'll get into this a little bit later, but we're really starting to see that diverse kind of range of investments take place, and that flexibility that was baked into the model really come to fruition. And there is an intention always from the start to help capitalize operating businesses alongside real estate. I think there's a conception of opportunity zones as a real estate tool, in part because we have seen a lot of focus on real estate in opportunity zones thus far. It's an easier investment to make for a place-based incentive like opportunity zones. You can't kind of pick up real estate and move it as easily as you can a business or something like that. So we are seeing, and then the rules and regulations kind of came out more quickly related to real estate. So we've seen a proliferation, of real estate projects using the incentive, but there was always a real intention from us, as a group that's very focused on entrepreneurship and economic dynamism, but also from the congressional co-sponsors that they wanted to see this, also work for small businesses who are looking to grow and innovate and create jobs. As Senator Tim Scott's quote says there, he was one of the original congressional co-sponsors and champions in the Senate. So a little bit more about the incentive itself and what it offers to investors. So the first is a temporary deferral. Essentially, if you put capital gains into a opportunity fund, and I'll get more into that a little bit later, but everything has to go through an opportunity fund. So if you put that money into an opportunity fund, you do not have to pay taxes on that until the end of 2026. So that's the first benefit. The second is a reduction when you do ultimately have to pay your taxes on those capital gains at the end of 2026. You do get a reduction in the cost if you hold your investment for a certain period of time. So this is really trying to incentivize patient capital. The last thing we want is capital kind of churning through some of these areas that have been distressed for a long time. We want capital to stay there and remain there and actually be able to have that true impact that's possible, I think, with patients. So the reduction, unfortunately, the 15 years, or the 15% step up in basis for 7 years is already passed. You would have had to put your capital gains into an opportunity fund by the end of 2019 to receive that investment, or that benefit rather. But for those who put their money into an opportunity fund at the end of this year, or by the end of this year, and hold it through the end of 2026, then there is a step up in basis, 10% for investments of that nature. And finally, and I think this is really where what we're seeing is the true incentive that kind of is motivating to investors, is an exemption. So on any capital gains made from these subsequent investments that you're making, so not your initial capital gains, but any gains that you make on your investment, if you hold that investment for 10 years, then at the end of the 10-year period, you will not have to pay taxes on that, on any gains from that investment you made in a qualifying opportunity zone project or business. So a little bit about the zones themselves too, as I think that this is, again, an area of some misinformation, or an area that often needs some clarification. Opportunity zones are some of the highest need communities in the United States. And you can see here as they compare to across a range of socioeconomic metrics, across not only other low income tracts that were eligible but not designated, but also just the national averages as well. By far it has a much higher poverty rate, almost double the national average. And across a whole host of, I think what's also very stark, a stark metric here is that the life expectancy is actually about 3 years shorter, more than 3 years shorter than the national average as well. So, these are historically kind of underserved communities. They are high need, and that the majority of opportunity zones the vast majority of opportunity zones that were designated by governors were done so with that kind of need in mind, as well as the potential, for these tracts to provide economic opportunities to their residents. So a little bit on how opportunity funds work as well. So as I mentioned, everything has to go through an opportunity fund. So that is, again, a key component of the design of the incentive. And these are new, essentially, new entities as of 2017, at least. And they self-certify. So there's really a low bar to becoming an opportunity fund. There are generally things that you have to do in order to retain that qualification. But it was always meant to be a pretty low burden or a low hurdle to become an opportunity fund. And that's really intentional in hopes that we get more investors to come and enter the market, and not necessarily only traditional investors that have a lot of capacity for compliance and things like that, but also, like more local investors that maybe don't have, as much of the sort of the back shop that is often required to make investments. An opportunity funds rather, they have to have at least 90% of their investments into qualified opportunity zone investments. And they do get tested on a twice yearly basis by the IRS to ensure compliance there. This is a private sector vehicle as well. So I think this is another real key area of difference between other community development incentives that you all might be very familiar with, like new market tax credits or other things, is that this is a very private sector driven incentive. This is not a program. There is no line item in the budget, that Congress designates a certain number of dollars every year or every 5 years towards opportunity zones. That's not the case. There's no kind of limitation on the budget here, which is great. But it also, it means that the private sector and other stakeholders are responsible for, establishing these opportunity funds and driving investment here. And that's really where the kind of flexibility component that I was talking about earlier comes in. We've seen that opportunity funds come in a lot of shapes and sizes and have a lot of different focuses. Some are national in focus, others are very hyper local. Some will specialize in startups, others will focus primarily on real estate. Some will be very closely held, others will have fund managers, and some will be more focused on a single investment opportunity, which we certainly saw a lot more of at the very beginning when regulations were much more clear around that type of a structure, versus ones that have, multi-assets, under their under their management. And that we're starting to see more of that as the structure became more clear and the rules of the road became a bit more clear, that allowed more complex structures to proliferate. So in terms of opportunity zone businesses, and certainly, this is one of the key areas where you can invest. Of course, you can invest in property, but opportunity zones businesses are another area where opportunity funds can put their capital in order to eventually receive those incentives if they hold them for the appropriate number of years. There are certain guardrails, though, to ensure that the investments that are receiving this type of capital are actually creating new economic opportunities as intended by Congress. We don't want this to be just a light rehab or going into a patent box somewhere. We really want to make sure that jobs are being created, that economic opportunity is being created, through the use of these dollars. And so there are a few kind of criteria or tests that are required in order for an operating zone business to qualify. So one, and this gets a little in the weeds, and so I will caveat all of this by saying I am not a tax lawyer, and I definitely encourage you all to think about kind of at the local level what resources may exist, maybe local tax firms, accounting firms, law firms, who may be really helpful in providing a lot of this technical assistance. Consistently, that is one thing that we hear a lot about, in terms of the real need for businesses, for investors, and just local communities who are sort of trying to get their arms around this. What does this all mean? How do we best take advantage of this? There are a lot of rules. For only being 9 pages of a statute, there are 500 pages of regulations, or more. So there's still a lot to understand and to make sure that, especially in the early days of the market, there are, I think, just a lot of kind of compliance, boxes to check. And so, I'll go through these relatively quickly. Of course, they become, more nuanced as you get into individual deals and things like that. But just putting it out there that may be something that, an SBDC or certainly kind of folks in your local communities can be thinking a little bit about. Is, how can we maybe tap some of this professional services, kind of what these firms who have this knowledge, who may be able to help local businesses, navigate this if opportunity zones are the right fit for them. So a couple things. So tangible properties, 70% of a business's tangible property must be qualifying opportunity zone business property. So that is a big one. Essentially saying that, most of your operations have to be located in the opportunity zone. That's an important one, of course. The other one is intangible property. So like a substantial portion of your intangible property also must be used in the active conduct or the trade or business in an opportunity zone. That is probably a particularly important one to look into if you are a kind of tech startup, something like that. 50% of your gross income must be derived from the active conduct of a trade or business in an opportunity zone. So these are, again, are all things really just meant to ensure that the vast majority of your business is taking place in an opportunity zone with some flexibility. And that's certainly something that we advocated for throughout the regulatory process. But, that generally you are locating the majority of your business, activities within the zone. There's also a limitation on SIN businesses. So golf courses, country clubs, massage parlors, liquor stores, et cetera. Those are not allowed to be recipients of OZ capital. I don't know if SIN business is a PC term now, prohibited businesses, I guess, but that's what they call it in the code. So the other thing is that, I think that the big thing here is that it's, in order to be a qualified asset, you have to either, the property has to be the original use. So it has to commence kind of with the qualifying opportunity zone business, or the business needs to substantially improve the property. And that's a pretty high threshold. You essentially have to double your basis, in the property itself. So for example, kind of what you purchased it for, you'd have to spend that same amount of money in improving it. So it is a relatively high threshold. And again, that's just to ensure that there's no kind of just very light rehab that's being done here. It's actually, you're really taking, potentially latent or unused or underutilized property, and you're really improving it and contributing to the community. So in terms of opportunity zones and businesses, and kind of where, really maybe more of the most important part of this presentation for your purposes, and I have several more slides that kind of just go into a little bit more about like kind of what we're seeing in the marketplace, but I want to kind of focus here for a little bit, in terms of what kind of opportunities, and it's really hard to not overuse the term opportunity when talking about OZs, but what opportunities really exist for this policy and operating businesses. So, I mean, if it's not clear kind of already from sort of how this all works, the business itself is not going to receive the tax benefit. The investor themselves are the ones that receive the benefit, the tax benefit for putting their money into these opportunity zone vehicles, these opportunity funds that ultimately will go into businesses. So, I do want to make that clear that it's more of a kind of trickle down benefit for businesses, and that opportunity zones can really present a new pool of local investors. And we've really seen that take place of, investors that, may often put their money, in wealth management firms, and it goes towards the coast, actually really rethinking it and thinking, I have a connection to some of these places. I would much rather see my money go into, local businesses or improving my, my hometown. So, it does provide a new source of local investors or national investors too, that may be drawn to your communities for other reasons. But it does present a new source of equity capital. So I think that is certainly important to note. Also, local anchor institutions. We've seen, local universities, local, large companies, local medical, facilities, really play an active role in opportunity zones being used successfully in smaller communities or just communities of any size. Erie Insurance, for example, in Erie, Pennsylvania, which includes some of the poorest zip codes in the country. They've started a $50 million opportunity fund and are distributing that, to several different projects, but some including operating businesses. And then I think another area of opportunity here is, aligning local community development incentives and plans, particularly around operating businesses with, with opportunity zones. We've seen that certainly at the federal level. There's been a lot of kind of alignment, with Department of Commerce, with the Economic Development, Administration, providing grants to local communities, but particularly focusing on those in opportunity zones. That model can certainly be applied at the more local level as well. And that's certainly been done too, I should say, where we are really starting to see communities kind of rally around opportunity zones and think about what are the tools that are already in our toolbox particularly for startups or new businesses, and how might we be able to align our opportunity zone strategy with those strategies as well. And so kind of more on that note, local partnerships and policy tools, kind of another bucket that I've listed out here, programs and incentives to support growing businesses. Again, these can be like very quickly and easily aligned, I think, with opportunity zones, or just, putting a focus more on those geographies. We've seen startup accelerators start, or workforce training programs start, that are specifically for businesses that are located in opportunity zones. Colorado, for example, has their opportunity zone accelerator that, again, is for startups that are located in OZs that want to become an OZ business, that want to attract that investment, that are ready for equity, and or are assessing if they are ready for like equity investment, and if opportunity zones are the right fit for them. That program has become really helpful in helping those businesses really determine next steps. Same with credit facilities to seed investments, and I think in particular to also identify site acquisition. If you're an opportunity zone business, or if you're a business that wants to move into an opportunity zone, you might need help finding a place that suits your needs within one. And so, some states are providing credit facilities or site acquisition kind of assistance to help with some of those moves. And then finally, kind of programs or grants to monitor impact. And I think particularly on the business side, this could really relate more to kind of how many jobs are being created, quality of jobs, things like that. That's a super important part of understanding the overall impact of opportunity zones on communities. And I think, and maybe I should have started with this, but I think there's really an important role here for SBDCs to play in that, as far as I understand, a lot of the work that you all do is really around kind of, providing some mentorship, being really, working with businesses very directly to kind of get, help them understand kind of what they need to really get off the ground and be successful. I think opportunity zones can be kind of part of a decision-making matrix for businesses, or something that you all can help kind of walk them through. First, the first real question is equity capital the right fit? It may not be. They may not want to give up a percentage of their company, for this type of capital. That's perfectly fine. It's not going to be a perfect fit for every single business. Debt may be the best option, in some of these cases, but for some, equity might be a great option. Maybe they've either exhausted other debt, or they don't want to go into debt, and equity may be a better situation, for a lot of businesses. So, I think just helping them understand that model, if that's going to work, and then what's needed to get them to a point where they can be accepting of equity capital, because obviously that comes with, some pitching, of course, attracting investors wanting to see, a whole host of documents to make sure that this is a sound investment for them. So there's a lot of prep work that's required before being a recipient, or being a ready recipient of equity capital. So I think, kind of taking businesses through those steps to make sure that they're kind of ready for that opportunity. Another one is that if you're already a business in an opportunity zone that's already existing and has existed prior to 2017, it may be really difficult for you to get, to qualify as an opportunity zone business. There are just, unfortunately, some kind of holes in the regulations that don't make it particularly easy for an existing business to receive, an existing business in a zone to receive capital. But if you are interested in relocating into an opportunity zone or expanding your business into an opportunity zone, there may be a real opportunity, there may be a real chance for, that to work out well. And for, businesses therefore to be eligible at least to speak with investors about receiving opportunity zones financing. So I think there are just some kind of real basic questions that may help businesses better assess if this is the right tool for them. And that could be a really important role for you all to play, and just, really being kind of a center point for all this information about what opportunity zones are, how they work, what are some local resources, including potentially other, community development incentives, accelerator programs, workforce training programs, and then, like I said at the beginning, even potentially like professional service firms, people like that who might be able to help them walk through, how to structure then an investment. And again, that's more going to be on the side of the investor, but there's a lot of compliance that will need to be done by the business too. So I think just making sure that, that they're ready for that and prepared to meet those requirements and meet some of those key tests will be important as well. So that's kind of where I would say, maybe a real important role for you all kind of on the ground as community leaders, working with businesses in your places. Happy to take questions on that too. I'll run through the rest of these slides relatively quickly. And then
we did have a question slide in here.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you want to wait till the end or if you're okay answering it now.
Sure, I can answer it now too. That's no problem. I want to, especially since that was kind of a real meaty slide, I'm happy to take a couple before I move on to the kind of last half of the presentation.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So Jane asks, how do you see the Opportunity Zone program aligning with the potential infrastructure bill?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a little bit TBD in that, we'll see if there's any sort of, government, if the government or if Congress decides to, potentially prioritize funding for opportunity zones, that may be something that happens. I don't know yet if that's a possibility. Obviously, the plans for an infrastructure bill are only starting to just emerge. But I mean, I think even if it's not kind of explicitly stated, that there are there's going to be a ton of money that's potentially flowing into communities, from this, again, potential bill that's being put together. And then I think, where communities really have a unique opportunity here, I'm sorry, I'm using that word just so much, but where communities, I think, can really, potentially take advantage of this is by, if there's, for example, grant programs or formulas that are, that allocate the funding for various programs to states and communities. Perhaps there is an alignment that if it's not done at the government or, the federal government level, then perhaps it's done more at the community level to, again, align some of those dollars coming in from, a potential infrastructure bill to align it with what's going on in opportunity zones. So I think that's something that, walking away from this presentation, I'd love for you all to take away is that, there are a lot of tools at the disposal of communities as well. And that's part of kind of why the federal aspect of this is so flexible. I think we wanted to make sure that this, that this incentive can be used for a community in Wyoming, which is going to look very, very different from, downtown Queens, where there's opportunity zones in New York City. The needs of those communities are going to be naturally vastly different. But we want opportunity zones to be designated in both places and to work in both places. And so that's where communities can also really play an important role in, determining what do they want, and layering incentives or disincentives, but we would probably more encourage the incentive route for, to ensure that developers or businesses are coming in and receiving, are locating in opportunity zones in a way that is going to benefit residents the most and align with the community and economic development plans that these places have.
Okay, and then I had another question come in here, and I think we got it answered, but maybe we can also articulate it verbally.
Okay.
Scott asked, is there a place to find out what O funds exist in our area?
Yeah, so not entirely, unfortunately. And this is in part because we don't have full kind of a federal reporting requirements regime, unfortunately. We're working on that. But so in the meantime, there's not sort of a full list of opportunity funds and where they exist. However, there's a couple of places where you can start to look. One is on Novogradac. They're a national tax accounting firm. They have a an opportunity fund directory. I want to say at this point it's maybe upwards of 800, 900 opportunity funds. And those opportunity funds generally will list if they are focused on specific areas or if they're nationally focused, what other, what kind of their investment focus is, things like that. So that would be a good place to start. And then perhaps, this is another area that is really ripe for kind of further development, but one of the best practices that we talk about a lot is kind of a central place where a lot of this information can exist, and encouraging states or communities, but generally this is a really good role for states to play, to kind of, again, collate all this information together, including kind of local opportunity funds, what kind of projects they're interested in, businesses, et cetera. And a lot of states have done this with some great success. And we encourage that as sort of a general best practice as well. So not a kind of easy answer to the question, but I think one where that could be really helpful, of course, to local communities as well.
Thank you. And there's one more question, and then we'll go ahead and proceed with the presentation.
Sure.
But the question is from Jenica: is there a simple example or case study of a small business that utilized this program directly, or is it mostly utilized by communities or investment groups?
Yeah, so I will get into that a little bit more actually in the rest of the presentation, but I want to again, kind of clarify just a couple things that are kind of within the question or at the basis of the question. And one is that, like, again, this is not a program. So this is not something that, again, communities I think can and should absolutely be actively involved in sort of the implementation of opportunity zones, and that, the attractment of investment, again, layering of various incentives to make sure that the types of projects or businesses that receive investments are the ones that they want in their communities. But the only people that are sort of taking advantage of or using the incentive directly are investors themselves in terms of, getting that incentive. So I did just want to clarify that it's a little bit nuanced, but because there are many other stakeholders certainly in the market that are playing an incredibly important role. So anyway, just wanted to sort of start with that, but then I'll get into a little bit more on some of the case studies that we've seen as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is just kind of a chart here to show sort of where we're at in the market, and more just to clarify that, we're still in the really early stages too. So I think that there's often a sort of proclivity towards talking about if opportunity zones are successful or not. And we are still so early in the market development and the kind of that sort of incubation. We're just sort of entering the maturation phase. We just got final regulations at the end of December of 2019. Of course, 2020 was supposed to be a very different year for everybody on a lot of different fronts, including for opportunity zones. But of course, the just like inevitable and market disruption of our daily lives, meant that the kind of market for opportunity zones was not immune. And it was also certainly disrupted, last year. So, we're certainly anticipating a lot more kind of further maturation, a lot more activity this year. But when it was supposed to be sort of a bang up year for opportunity zones last year, kind of was still, the market still grew pretty significantly, but probably not as much as we would have if we were in kind of a normal time. So I just want to point out that we're still pretty early here. So one area that I would really encourage everyone on this call to take, or one resource rather, that I would encourage everyone on this call to check out is our opportunity zone activity map. So this is an area, you can actually, you see here that you can sort by operating business. So if you wanted to see a specific case study of an operating business that was able to receive an opportunity zone investment, you can do that. You can also see, you can search by, this is obviously all activities. You can search just by investments. You can search just by funds too. So, while we don't have nearly as comprehensive of a fund list as the Novogradac one that I mentioned, we do have funds listed on here specifically, so you can see if anyone aligns in your areas as well. And then we have initiatives, which are more like, for example, a state opportunity zone or a local opportunity zones coordinator that is helping to, connect projects with investors. That's kind of an example of an initiative that's more at the community level. So you can see here that, there is, again, a real diversity of investments that are taking place, from rural broadband projects, vertical farming, which I already mentioned, I think, a historic hotel, revitalization and rehab. There's a minority business incubator in South Central Los Angeles. We have different types of kind of more tech businesses that have also received investment, including kind of a cybersecurity firm and a robotics firm in Baltimore that actually moved from Silicon Valley back to Baltimore, where they had some roots. Many of the founders, I think, went to Johns Hopkins. So they actually relocated into an opportunity zone in Baltimore from California and are receiving investment there. So some really exciting kind of, again, relocations, businesses that are understanding that they can really take advantage of opportunity zones by tapping into this new pool of investors who are interested in places and things that they may not have otherwise been normally interested in. So these are some kind of market segments that are definitely heavily represented on our map. Affordable workforce housing, brownfield redevelopment is a big one. Clean technology. So we are seeing some kind of investments into green technologies, clean technologies. Healthcare is another one. And then historic preservation. We are seeing more operating business investments, but it is a fairly small percentage, of the market currently. And again, this is kind of going back to the maturation phase. We are really hopeful that as the market continues to mature, we will see a bigger share or larger share of investments going into businesses. But I think, the getting the kind of everyone's hands around the regulations took a little bit more time than anticipated. And there's still some outstanding questions that we're still trying to get some answers to that would particularly help existing businesses receive additional investment. So Indiana is another example, kind of essentially a microcosm of our map. And one that I'll just point out quickly is Brookville. Local investors in Brookville used proceeds from the sale of a business. So they received, they had capital gains that they had from a sale of their own individual business. And they have used that to revitalize Main Street. They've built some new housing. They've invested in the local newspaper that was otherwise going to shut down and needed an infusion of capital. So they were able to save that. And they financed a new hotel, or the revitalization of a hotel, to boost the nascent local tourism industry. So kind of a really interesting example of a very small rural town. I think it only has about 2,000 people. And a local investor who, instead of, putting their money, with their wealth management firm and just saying, do with it what you will, really took it upon themselves to reinvest it back into their community, kind of recycle that capital and put it into a variety of things, including real estate and businesses. The last thing I'll say too is that, their local institutions are really, really critical to shaping outcomes. So I mentioned the state of Colorado. They were an early adopter of opportunity zones and, set up a technical assistance kind of grant fund for communities so that they could better understand kind of what this means and how to, what are some best practice around attracting investment. But also, put together the Opportunity Zones Accelerator program for businesses in Colorado located in OZs. Again, to just kind of go through the process of better understanding if this is going to work for them, if this is the right fit, and if it is, how to move forward. The Erie Downtown Development Corporation is another one. They're admittedly more focused on real estate, but they also work with a kind of sister organization to help attract investment to some of to their innovation district and to some of their startup businesses that are taking place and that are locating there specifically to be part of that innovation district that has attracted a fair amount of OZ capital, especially for as small of a city as Erie. I mean, it's still sizable, but it's you wouldn't think of Erie as being a place that necessarily would attract the type of venture capital that they're starting to see. So, this is just to say that local institutions are really important to sort of bringing investors to the table with community leaders, with businesses, with groups like yourselves, who again are really tuned in to what the needs of local businesses are. I mean, you should be at the table for these types of conversations in your communities, to better understand how, what are the questions for businesses? What are they coming to you with? Are they going to be ready for equity investment? If not, how do we get them there? Who are the investments or who are the investors that are potentially more interested in the operating business side versus the real estate side? Getting them to the table, pairing them with the types of operating businesses that might be of interest. So I really think that, partnering with local institutions, where they exist, hopefully they exist in your communities. But I think that's been a really great best practice that we've seen. Is the communities that have done really well with opportunity zones are ones that kind of recognized early on that this is a really important new and unique tool, and put some infrastructure in place to, again, kind of bring these stakeholders all to the table to think through the best way forward, in terms of developing their strategy that was going to work for creating more economic opportunities in their communities. So I think that actually is the end of the presentation. My email's here. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, but I'm also happy to take questions now as well.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that, if anybody has any questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or the question function on Zoom. But in the meantime, Catherine, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Of course.
So I guess the first would be if someone has some additional questions or needs some additional clarification on opportunity zones, where might they be able to find the answers to those questions online?
Yeah, so we have, we certainly have some resources on our website. I think actually somebody dropped into the chat our website that has the Opportunity Zones resources there. I mean, that's a good place to start, not only because we've created individual resources ourselves, but we also try to bring together in one place information from some of our partners, who have done a really good job of resource creation around this. Novogradac is a really good source. I know I've mentioned them before for their Opportunity Fund directory. We work with them all the time, and they are just an excellent firm that has historically worked with new markets, low-income housing tax credits, other programs you may be very familiar with. And so they have entered into the OZ space and created a lot of resources around just kind of a general how to understand this, what's required, and that gets into a lot of detail. So that may be another good resource, depending on what type and what level of detail you're looking to go into. But that may be one good source as well. And I'm sure that we link to their resource center, I think, on our website too. So if you're looking for kind of a one-stop shop, that may be a good place. But yeah.
Thank you. So we had another question jump into the chat box here. Lisa's asking, are you able to talk a little bit about how Mason City put theirs together and how long does this process take? So that's how we got connected to you in the first place, actually, was the activity with Opportunity Zones in Mason City, Iowa. So do you have any insight on that at all?
I don't, unfortunately. But I'm happy to do a little bit more looking into what they did and get back to you. But I'm not familiar directly with what Mason City did. Sorry.
No problem. I got another question actually texted to me.
Okay.
Do you know how the Opportunity Zones were pieced together in the various states?
Sure.
Like
yeah.
who decided which Opportunity Zones were where? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And I kind of glossed over that in the initial part of the presentation. But essentially, the statute allowed governors or state executives, so all the territories as well, to essentially take stock of their low income census tracts, which are defined by Treasury. And I think generally that map looks like the New Markets tax credit map. So if you're familiar, with the low income communities or designation under that program, more or less the same. And they were allowed to designate 25% of their low income census tracts as opportunity zones. So the way that, governors, it looks very different in terms of how governors decided to choose those tracts. Some governors did so pretty unilaterally or with their, teams. Some governors did a lot of community outreach to better understand what census tracts were going to be best for, were one very high need, but also two, had the ability to attract investment, to their places as well. So there were no kind of, I guess, requirements of what governors or how governors should choose their tracks. That was sort of left to them to just to figure out the best way forward. But that was ultimately up to every governor to do that. So that's how they were decided. Basically, they had 25% of all their low income census tracts that they could choose as opportunity zones.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If a lot of times, so keep in mind you're speaking to SBDC directors and counselors, so we work one-on-one with small businesses, but we also are connected to a lot of economic development folks, like executive directors for development organizations. If any of those organizations would like to get connected to EIG, is that an appropriate connection for us to make? Or how do you foresee us maybe facilitating some of those deep level questions if they want to get in touch with you and your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that is we're happy to, and if we can't answer all those questions directly, like we work with a lot of partners who might be able to, and we can kind of redirect too. But yeah, absolutely happy to do that. Another really good source that works with a lot of kind of economic development agencies is the CDFA. I think it's the Council of Development Finance Agencies. They have put together some really fantastic resources, I think, for stakeholders, particularly like that, who, again, are kind of working within, their communities, who are really familiar with a lot of the community development or economic development, incentives or tax credit programs already, and are thinking through how to best, fold opportunity zones into that strategy. So they are excellent partners too, and I would definitely recommend, them in addition to us. But we can always, kind of facilitate that introduction too. And those are exactly the type of people that I'm talking about when I kind of talk about local institutions or local intermediaries. Are those folks who have, a real sense of what the economic development needs are on the ground. Those are precisely the people who should be involved in kind of bringing others to the table, or being at the table in, helping determine how opportunity zones can best work for, these communities and their residents.
Yeah, absolutely. I think although we're not the investors or we're not the end users, the businesses, we are in the trenches with both of these groups. And so connecting them and understanding the subject matter is maybe really where we fit in.
Absolutely. And I think that's, again, that just to reiterate, that's where really I feel like, SBDCs can play a really important role here is, kind of playing almost an intermediary role yourselves, but also really as a real kind of arbiter of a lot of really great information and education that can be brought to businesses directly, but also to some of these economic development professionals as well.
Absolutely. Well, I don't see any more questions. So thank you so much, Catherine. It was a huge treat to have you here. We know you're busy. So we really appreciate you joining us and chatting for a bit.
Yeah,
so
it was my pleasure. And like I said, my email is there. So feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. And we're happy to help answer, or at least get you to the right place to answer them directly. So.
Awesome. Well, I suppose before we end the call, Stacy, is there anything else that you'd like to add? Or I know maybe if Jill's still on, was there anything else that you'd like to add before we go ahead and say goodbye?
Nothing from us. This is Stacy. Just thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you all. All right.